The courtroom air was heavy, like something sacred had just been disturbed. No one moved, no one blinked. Even the bailiff, usually stone-faced and indifferent, leaned forward an inch, caught in the current that had swept through the chamber. Jasmine Crockett stood behind the long mahogany desk, fingers splayed across a thick black folder marked "Confidential" in bold red type. Her expression wasn't angry. It was focused, surgical, like a scalpel just before the first incision. Across from her sat Donald Trump, arms crossed tightly, his jaw twitching in a rhythm that gave away the storm behind his silence. The cameras had already started to roll. Live feeds broadcasted this hearing to millions, perhaps the most watched session in recent history. Yet no one had expected this moment. No leak, no whisper of what was coming. Until Jasmine tapped the mic and spoke. "Mr. Trump," she said, voice low and resolute, "I'm holding here documentation related to your spouse, Melania Trump. These documents outline in detail a series of financial transactions and offshore asset trails that have never been disclosed to the American public. Would you like to explain them now, or shall I?" The former president's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For the first time in a long time, he looked unsure, not furious, not defiant, but momentarily suspended in something dangerously close to fear. She opened the folder. The soft thwomp of paper against paper echoed louder than any gavel. Page after page of stamped, notarized material, some highlighted, others blacked out by foreign authorities. On the top was a wire transfer receipt. Below that, a Dubai-registered shell company connected to a European art dealer. Jasmine flipped to the next page, then another, each one darker than the last. "This is a witch hunt," Trump finally burst out, voice cracking, trying to fill the space had turned against him. But no one responded. His own attorney glanced down, avoiding eye contact. "Page 12, Jasmine said calmly, sliding a single sheet across the desk. "You might want to read that aloud, Mr. Trump. It's addressed to you." There was a long pause. Too long. Trump stared at the paper, unmoving. Then, with a swift motion, he shoved it back. "You're disgusting," he muttered. "Dragging my wife into this? She has nothing to do with any of this." Jasmine didn't blink. "On the contrary, she had everything to do with it. You just made sure no one noticed." The room erupted. Audible gasps shot through the media rows. Phones were already in the air, catching the moment. A Fox News producer dropped his pen. MSNBC anchors whispered furiously through their earpieces. The judge banged the gavel once, twice. "Order!" But it was too late. The moment had landed, not like a scandal, but like a stone into still water, sending rings of reckoning across the nation. Jasmine slowly gathered the pages, tapping them into a neat stack before returning them to the folder. "Consider this an introduction," she said. "The full testimony begins now." And with that, the hearing that had begun as a routine deposition transformed into something far greater, a slow, agonizing unmasking. Not just of Trump, not just of Melania, but of the entire machinery that shielded power behind silk gloves and pearl earrings. The courtroom had frozen, but outside, America was beginning to burn. The cameras didn't catch the moment the folder first arrived, not when it was slipped under Jasmine Crockett's door at 6:42 a.m., wrapped in a plain manila envelope, no return address. But the security cameras in her congressional office caught her reaction. She stood still for 10 full seconds after reading the first page, then whispered something to herself, inaudible, before picking up the ph. 1. Inside that folder was a trail, not gossip, not innuendo, but cold, audited proof. Company names, dates, asset transfers, a chain of payments so complex it took her team a week to decipher. The deeper they dug, the clearer the shape became. Shell corporations registered under the name MK Designs International, real estate transactions in Slovenia, luxury art trades involving galleries that had quietly disappeared since 2020. And in the center of it all, Melania Trump. For years, Melania had been a ghost in Trump's political orbit. Elegant, silent, above the fray. But Crockett's investigators, combing through public records, found something different. In 2018, just months after Trump's tax returns became the object of a federal standoff, a Luxembourg bank approved a high-value loan to a shell company with only one recorded officer, Melania's cousin, Denis Ciglegnac. The collateral? A rare sculpture valued at $2.3 million, later tied to a transaction flagged in a European Commission anti-corruption probe. That sculpture, Crockett would later reveal, had once sat in the White House's private East Wing study. The legal trail was tenuous, but the ethical one was volcanic. Jasmine didn't rush. She built the timeline with military precision. Each data point was verified through multiple sources: EU investigative memos, FOIA releases, and old diplomatic cables buried in public record archives. This wasn't just political theater, it was prosecutorial theater, and every piece of evidence had weight. In court, the Trump team came out swinging. "This folder is inadmissible," Trump's attorney barked, standing with a theatrical flair. "The documents were acquired through a leak, possibly foreign, and have no chain of custody. We move to strike them from the record." But Jasmine was ready. "I'd like to remind the court," she said evenly, "that this folder contains publicly available information cross-referenced with certified wire transfer receipts and notary records from the EU Transparency Commission. Not a single document here is classified. Not a single document is fiction." She walked toward the judge's bench, placed the folder carefully on the evidence table, and slid it forward with deliberate calm. "What we're looking at isn't theory, it's a map of transactions that trace directly to the financial concealment of millions, orchestrated, or at the very least, signed off by a sitting First Lady, while the White House claimed full ethical compliance." Trump leaned forward, lips tight, fists clenched on the desk in front of him. The room was quiet, except for the sound of a single flashbulb clicking from the press box. He turned slightly toward his lawyer and muttered, "Hit her with defamation." But the damage was already done. The judge, stern, impartial, adjusted her glasses and spoke slowly. "We'll hear the rest of Ms. Crockett's statement. The material, as presented, appears to meet minimum standards of evidentiary relevance. The motion to strike is denied." Trump sat back, visibly stunned. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had weathered bigger storms. Russia, January 6th, the documents raid. But this felt different. This wasn't about him, not directly. It was about Melania, and the power of suggestion that the woman who had stood silently at his side through every scandal may have been running her own game all along. In the gallery, someone gasped audibly. Jasmine didn't flinch. She held up the next page. "We'll now review a company registration from 2014, signed in Melania's mother's maiden name, in a country she visited 5 times between 2015 and 2018. The address listed belongs to a now-defunct art logistics warehouse that handled over $14 million in private transfers during Trump's presidency. This is Tia. A signature." She pointed to the elegant scrawl at the bottom of the form. "And this," she said, "is the same signature from Melania's 2006 customs declaration." A beat. Then a low, building murmur spread through the court. Trump stared at the signature, his own name nowhere on it, but his silence now deafening. This wasn't a folder anymore. It was a fuse. In the days following her explosive document reveal, Jasmine Crockett wasn't seen smiling. She moved like someone carrying something heavy, not just evidence, but the weight of narrative itself. She knew that unmasking Donald Trump was expected, even predictable, but to expose Melania, to unravel the pristine apolitical facade of a First Lady who had spent 4 years appearing untouchable, that was sacrilege to some, and that's why it mattered. The courtroom returned to order with more than tension. It returned with dread, because no one really knew Melania Trump. Not the pundits who wrote think pieces about her silence, not the tabloids that obsessed over her wardrobe, not even the Republican strategists who, in private, admitted she was a cipher we could sell. Jasmine turned that myth into ammunition. She started slow, pulling up footage from an old 2012 interview, a barely watched segment on Slovenian state TV. In it, Melania speaks comfortably in her native language, discussing an international project she's launching to support Eastern European artists with potential. At the time, it seemed benign. Until Crockett showed the next slide. Here, she said, is a company registered the same month Melania made that statement. Novak Art Trust, filed in Zug, Switzerland. It listed cultural investment procurement as its stated business activity. Between 2013 and 2017, it moved over $9.4 million between 6 countries. 2 of those countries, Cyprus and Liechtenstein, were under active review by Interpol for art laundering networks. Trump squinted at the screen, lips pursed, fingers pressed together. He'd heard rumblings of this one before. Whispers in TK, financial briefings that his staff never let reach the press. Back then, it was noise. Now it was a pattern. Melania's name isn't on the registration, Crockett acknowledged, pacing slowly. But the emails recovered from a Slovenian server, verified by international IP logs, show direct communication between Melania Knaus and an executive assistant for the fund. She clicked to the next slide. An email subject line. Transfer timing for Luxembourg shipment. Match invoice naming to U.S. Customs discretion. Trump finally broke the silence. "You're turning emails into crimes now?" he barked. "That's not a damn smoking gun. It's a translation error." Jasmine didn't look at him. She spoke only to the court. "No one's accusing Mrs. Trump of shipping drugs or weapons," she said. "But high-value art, undeclared assets, Visa-bundled donations for European patrons who later secured U.S. green cards, that's not imagination, that's a system, and she was inside it." The judge raised an eyebrow, but didn't interrupt. Crockett motioned toward the evidence board. Melania's 2016 tax disclosure listed a modest $15,000 in personal income from design consulting. Yet within 8 months of that filing, her personal foundation made a $600,000 donation to a Dubai-based arts initiative, an initiative that was under investigation for laundering funds through curated national identity collections. She let the implication hang in the air. Then she delivered the dagger. And during that same year, while the White House insisted Melania had stepped away from all private activity, a former associate of hers from the fashion world filed a notarized affidavit claiming he had managed 3 offshore logistics accounts tied to her family. One of those accounts made monthly payments to a consultancy in Prague that was also tied to visa accelerators flagged by the Department of Homeland Security. The silence was oppressive. Even the court stenographer had slowed, glancing up between notes. Trump leaned back, not speaking, not defending, just absorbing. Because this wasn't about one wire transfer or a single forgotten LLC. This was a mosaic, and Jasmine was painting it stroke by stroke. Outside the courthouse, cable networks were losing their minds. CNN's Chiron read, "Melania's millions, Crockett connects dots, Trump didn't see coming." Fox News wasn't sure what to do. Some anchors downplayed it, calling it a smear job. Others admitted the evidence was concerning, if not criminal. But Jasmine wasn't in it for media validation. She turned back to the judge, voice composed but rising. Mrs. Trump's empire was built quietly, intelligently. She didn't break the law in the open. She manipulated the margins, the places where luxury, legality, and loopholes intersect. And while we were watching her wardrobe, she was building a fortress. Trump muttered something under his breath, indecipherable but bitter. Crockett didn't look at him. Her focus never wavered. "She wasn't the victim of power," she said. "She was its architect." And just like that, the myth of Melania, composed elegance, untouched by political scandal, began to fracture. Not with an explosion, but with a whisper of truth too precise to ignore. It wasn't the documents that finally cracked him. It was the stillness. The unbearable stillness in the courtroom after Jasmine Crockett finished reading a segment from a 2017 financial ethics waiver personally signed by Donald Trump, exempting the First Lady from future disclosures tied to non-governmental personal income sourced through international channels. No one moved. No one objected. Because it was real, verifiable, logged and time-stamped. Trump shifted in his seat. His fingers tapped the table, then clenched. "You people are sick," he said suddenly. voice louder than anyone expected. "This is harassment. You're dragging my wife into her fantasy just because you can't touch me." The gavel came down once, sharp, but the sound was already lost in the chaos his words set loose. Gasps rose from the gallery. Journalists leaned forward. A woman in the third row mouthed, "Did he just say that?" Crockett didn't flinch. She kept her eyes locked on him, but her expression didn't change. It was as if she'd already written this chapter in her head days ago. "Mr. Trump," she said quietly, "these are your signatures. These are your blind trust clauses. These are the institutions you appointed to keep them hidden. You want to argue the facts? Argue them. But do not," her voice sharpened, "do not insult this court with victimhood." He rose. "I'm not going to sit here while you smear my family with forged paperwork and foreign hearsay." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Trump, sit down, or you will be removed from the chamber." "I'm defending my wife," he snapped. "You think she ran some international crime ring out of a closet while I was president? She's a former model. She doesn't even like politics." Jasmine's voice cut through him, cold and deliberate. "Which is precisely why she got away with it for so long." The room fell quiet again. Even the judge didn't move. Then Jasmine opened the next folder, a thinner one, labeled 2015-2016 Transition Memos. "These were recovered through a Freedom of Information request," she continued. "Internal White House emails show that in early 2017, the administration was alerted by a State Department analyst to possible foreign entanglements tied to the First Lady's extended family. That analyst was reassigned within 2 weeks. The alert was never logged into the presidential archive." Trump pointed directly at her. "You're lying." Her gaze didn't shift. "Prove it." It was the challenge he didn't know how to take. He looked at his lawyer, who was pale, sweating. The man had no words, because in that moment, the lies were losing oxygen. Jasmine turned toward the bench. "Your Honor, the defense has claimed these documents are slanderous, unverified, and irrelevant. I now submit into evidence a signed copy of the 2017 ethics waiver, notarized, confirmed by the Office of Government Ethics, and already archived in public federal records." She walked forward, heels echoing. Every footstep was deliberate. When she handed the copy to the clerk, she added quietly, "This isn't a takedown, it's a reckoning." The judge scanned the document, then nodded. "Accepted." Trump dropped into his seat like something had been pulled from under him. His breathing had changed, shorter, erratic. The mask of bravado, always one insult away from shattering, finally cracked. He stared at Jasmine with something unfamiliar in his eyes. Not anger, not dominance, but dread. The fear of losing control over the one narrative he thought he could always bend. That of protector, husband, strong man. And now, he couldn't even shield her. The live streams exploded. Clips of Trump's "You people are sick" outburst circulated within minutes. The soundbite was everywhere. Hashtags trended globally. Hashtag Melania files. Hashtag Trump unravels. Hashtag Jasmine vs. the machine. And still, the hearing continued. Jasmine returned to her table, calm, as if the explosion hadn't just happened, as if the temperature in the room hadn't jumped 10 degrees. She didn't need to win with a single moment. She was building an avalanche, one cold fact at a time. Behind her, aides whispered updates from outside. Fox News was spinning. CNN was stunned. MSNBC had just booked a Slovenian corruption expert. But none of that mattered. Because inside this room, Donald Trump had finally said what he wasn't supposed to say. And Jasmine had made sure the whole world heard it. The courtroom was still buzzing from the outburst, but Jasmine didn't ride the chaos. She let the tension simmer, gave the air time to breathe. Her next move wasn't a document or a clip. It was a voice, one that had crossed oceans and borders to speak. "Your Honor," Jasmine said, her tone precise. "The court will now hear a protected witness testimony via encrypted remote link, granted under U.S. whistleblower protections and verified by the DOJ's International Crimes Division." Trump's attorney stood abruptly. "Objection. This is a foreign national with no legal standing." "The witness is providing direct testimony tied to transactions already entered into evidence," the judge cut in. "Objection overruled. Proceed. The screen blinked to life. A dimly lit room, curtains drawn, a woman's face, pixelated for privacy, voice altered. But her words came through with chilling clarity. I worked for a gallery in Ljubljana, Slovenia between 2015 and 2018, the voice began. Our firm specialized in discreet sales to elite clients, mostly unregistered art, often with no traceable valuation. Jasmine leaned forward slightly. Can you describe the nature of the transactions involving MK Designs International? A pause. Then, that entity made 3 purchases through our firm. The name used was Melania Trump. The buyer never appeared in person. Everything was arranged through proxies, but the pieces were sent to a warehouse in Monte Carlo, later flagged in a Europol investigation into laundering via cultural artifacts. Gasps echoed faintly from the gallery. Jasmine glanced toward Trump. He didn't blink. Were any of those purchases connected to immigration programs or EB-5 consultancy services? Another pause. Yes. 2 of the clients who donated art later received U.S. investor visas within months. We were instructed to make the invoices match cultural investment guidelines. Trump shot up again. This is a foreign shakedown. No court in this country should give weight to anonymous propaganda. The judges... Gavel snapped. Sit down, Mr. Trump. One more outburst and I will remove you. He sank back into his chair, teeth grinding, face turning a shade redder than the tie knotted under his chin. Jasmine's voice didn't falter. Were you ever contacted by U.S. authorities during this period? No, the witness replied. But I received threats after the Monaco warehouse was shut down. My visa application to the U.S. was denied the following year. And what made you come forward now? Silence filled the screen. Then, slowly, the voice returned. Because I watched her sit beside him while he tore this country apart. And I knew what was behind her eyes. I knew what she was hiding. Jasmine nodded slowly. No further questions. The feed cut to black. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with implication, not accusation. There was no need to scream criminality. The web had already been spun. Outside, the media storm was immediate. CNN replayed the clip on loop. European outlets confirmed the existence of the Monte Carlo warehouse. A former Europol analyst appeared on Deutsche Welle, validating the witnesses' claims. Twitter lit up with memes, one showing Melania photoshopped as the silent collector, cloaked in shadow, holding a golden sculpture. But inside the courthouse, Jasmine wasn't smiling. She knew how fragile these moments could be. The truth alone was never enough. It had to be built, stacked, weighed, and woven into something no one could walk away from. As she returned to her seat, she could feel Trump's eyes burning into her. She was just a model, he muttered. Just a wife. Jasmine didn't turn to face him. She didn't have to. When the public was looking at her outfits, she said flatly, she was moving capital across borders. The room went dead silent. There was nothing left to argue, just a man unraveling in real time, and the woman who refused to look away. By the time Jasmine Crockett requested the court's permission to directly access some sets, a mean Donald Trump under oath, even seasoned legal analysts thought it was a bluff, a political stunt with no chance of approval. But the trap had already been set months earlier. Back in 2023, Trump had filed a sworn declaration in a defamation countersuit that opened the door to what lawyers called testimonial reciprocity. That technicality, buried in legal footnotes and largely forgotten by the media, was all Crockett needed. And when Judge Martinez granted the request, citing Trump's previous voluntary engagement in relevant sworn matters, the courtroom buzzed like a power line before a storm. Jasmine stood, collected, hands behind her back. Trump adjusted his mic with exaggerated confidence, but the redness in his ears gave him away. She began without preamble. Mr. Trump, during your presidency, did you or did you not claim in 2017 that all Trump family financial dealings had been placed into a blind trust and that no member of your household would be involved in international business negotiations? His lawyer started to object, but Trump waved him off. I did, because we followed the rules. Unlike your side. Jasmine gave a short nod. And that blind trust, Did it include assets linked to Melania's personal business accounts? She didn't have business accounts, Trump said. She had her design stuff, her old modeling money, things like that, nothing international. Jasmine raised her eyebrows. No shell companies? No European invoices? No foundations making overseas donations? Trump leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. I don't micromanage my wife's receipts. She paused, then lowered the boom. Yet you signed a disclosure waiver in 2017 that allowed those accounts to operate outside of ethics review. Trump stared at her. That was routine, legal. Jasmine stepped forward, quiet now, almost soft. Then let me ask you something simple. Do you believe laundering funds through high-value art transactions routed through shell companies to bypass disclosure laws is a crime? Trump hesitated. Just long enough. If it's done illegally, yes, of course. Good, Jasmine said, her tone sharpening. Then let's go through Exhibit D together. The screen lit up with a flowchart. Not a complicated one, even the layperson could follow it. Box 1, MK Designs International, Slovenia, Arrow, payment, 2016, $480,000. Box 2, Art Logistics Global, Liechtenstein, Arrow, shipment, private sculpture, exempt from customs. Box 3, Melania Trump Foundation, Dubai, Arrow, charitable donation. Jasmine didn't narrate the chart. She didn't need to. Instead, she lifted a transcript of a 2016 voicemail recovered from a federal review of the Mar-a-Lago server backups. It had been overlooked in the noise of the bigger scandals, but Crockett's team hadn't missed it. The judge permitted the playback. Trump's voice came through the speakers, slightly distorted. Just have Melania run it through her thing, you know, the art company. Nobody checks art. Make sure the invoice says gift. We're not reporting that SHT. A gasp. Somewhere in the second row, a journalist dropped their pen. Trump sat frozen, eyes narrowing into slits. That wasn't authenticated, he said sharply. That could be AI. Jasmine shook her head once. The timestamp, phone metadata, and ISP logs confirm it. DOJ verification team signed off 3 weeks ago. The voicemail was never deleted, just buried. She turned back to him. So, again, Mr. Trump, do you believe using art transactions to avoid financial transparency is criminal? His mouth opened, then closed. That was locker room talk. Laughter broke out in the gallery. The judge banged her gavel. Order. Jasmine didn't look away. You said it. You signed it. You moved it. Trump looked down at the table, fingers tapping, slower now. The bravado had deflated. All that remained was calculation, the math of damage control. Crockett stepped back, letting silence hang. This wasn't just about proving guilt. It was about dismantling the myth, the illusion of control, the aura of invincibility, the fantasy that this man and the empire behind him would never answer for the shadows they walked through. In that silence, a subtle shift happened, a tremor. Even some of Trump's supporters felt it. A crack in the marble. And Jasmine? She wasn't smiling. She was building. The courtroom had barely recovered from the voicemail bombshell when Jasmine calmly addressed the judge. Your Honor, the House Committee would like to call its next witness, Ms. Alexandra Crockett. A ripple passed through the room. Journalists exchanged sharp glances. On cable news chyrons around the country, producers scrambled to spell the name correctly. Alexandra Crockett. A name almost no American had heard, yet one that would dominate headlines for weeks. She walked in slowly, a tall, weathered woman in her 50s, her black suit crisp, her eyes unreadable. A former logistics officer at Art Logistics Global in Liechtenstein, she had quietly resigned in 2018, no interviews, no subpoenas, off the grid, until now. She sat, took the oath, and adjusted her glasses. Her accent was thick but clear. I was in charge of customs exemption classifications for shipments labeled as private diplomatic gifts between 2015 and 2017, One of those clients was Mrs. Melania Trump. Trump leaned forward suddenly. "That woman's a fraud," he muttered loudly. Jasmine raised a hand. "We'll let her speak. The evidence will stand on its own." Crockett looked straight ahead, not even glancing at Trump. "In July of 2016, I personally oversaw a sculpture listed as Marble Rose Bloom, shipped to Dubai. It was hollow. Inside was a series of bearer bonds totaling nearly $1.2 million. The sculpture was insured for $9,000. The entire transaction was signed off by the client, Melania Trump." Asps. Audible now. The judge looked to the committee. "Do you have documentation?" Jasmine stepped forward like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. "Your Honor, we submit into evidence Exhibit G, the international shipping form signed by Ms. Trump, bearing her private notary seal and dated July 18, 2016. Also included is the customs clearance request under diplomatic channel DCH-04, routed through the Slovenian embassy." Trump's lawyer stood stammering, but Judge Martinez motioned for silence. Then Crockett continued, quieter this time, almost regretful. "I warned her. I said if this is ever traced, you'll burn with it. And she said, that's why it's marble, so it can be shattered before it ever talks." Jasmine turned to the gallery, locking eyes with the sea of stunned onlookers. "That's how power talks, when it thinks no one's listening." Trump rose, furious now, knocking over his glass of water. "This is a setup. You don't know her. She's never even met Melania." But Crockett was already reaching into her folder. "She gave me this." She unfolded a small photograph, a signed Christmas card from Melania, dated December 2016, thanking her for the elegant discretion. The courtroom broke into chaos, reporters typing like gunfire, the judge slamming the gavel. "Order in the court." Trump stared at the card as if it were a ghost. For the first time, his lips moved but no sound came out. Jasmine turned to him, calm but cutting. "This isn't just financial misconduct. This is deception layered in privilege, hidden under art, protected by foreign channels. And now, it's in the open." She stepped aside. Crockett remained still, unmoved, like a living monument to the part of power no one ever wants to see, the silent facilitator. The hands that do the burying. The silence that followed was heavier than any outburst. Because the damage wasn't just reputational now. It was legal. It was personal. And it was real. Trump sat back down slowly, the fury draining from his face. For the first time, he looked unsure, not defeated, but aware. Aware that the wall had cracked, and the water was coming in. As the echoes of Crockett's testimony faded, Jasmine let the silence hang like fog, knowing that every second intensified the moment. Then, with a subtle nod, she raised another file. "We now turn to Exhibit H, documents provided voluntarily by whistleblower Davorin Mejnar, former compliance officer at Sava Bank, Slovenia." The name struck like a spark in a dry forest. The Trump team visibly shifted. Melania's name had always remained wrapped in Eastern European mystique. Fashion, silence, exile. But Slovenia, that was her ground zero, and now it was speaking. Jasmine opened the folder with careful, deliberate calm. In 2015, before Donald Trump's official campaign began, a dormant account at Sava Bank was suddenly reactivated. Over the next 18 months, it moved a total of $9.6 million through shell entities registered in Panama, Montenegro, and the Seychelles. She turned toward the judge. These transactions directly match the timeline of known real estate purchases, unexplained wire transfers to design firms, and a particularly curious $1.4 million consulting payment to an entity labeled MTT Solutions, an LLC whose only officer was Melania Trump. Trump leaned forward, voice low and guttural. "You're fabricating. These aren't real. Nobody has access to those banks." But Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she clicked her remote. Behind her, a projection flickered on. A grainy video. The audience stilled again. It showed a man in a suit, mid-40s, receding hairline, nervous eyes, sitting in what looked like a nondescript European hotel room. The subtitles began. My name is Devorin Mejnar. I worked at Savabank for 12 years. These ledgers you're holding, I digitized them myself. The Trump account was reactivated under internal pressure. The transfers were flagged as suspicious by our tow. But those flags were overridden. I was told the client had international immunity. That client was Melania.